All right, here's another question from the nonlinear functions with one or two variable series. This one involves a quadratic equation and a linear equation in a system of equations. So let's read the question. If x1, y1, and x2, y2 are two solutions to the system of equations above, what is the value of y1 plus y2? Real quickly, when you solve a system of equations involving a quadratic equation and a linear, there are three scenarios that could happen. So quickly illustrating, just to give you the background, a little bit of a background on this question. So here's a quadratic, here's a quadratic, here's a quadratic. I'm not saying these are the graphs of these equations. I just want to give you a quick glimpse and a quick review. System of equations involving two solutions is where you have a quadratic equation and a linear intersecting in two places. You could have one solution whereby the quadratic equation and the linear function only intersect at one place. It's going to be at the vertex. And last but not least, you might have a quadratic equation with a linear equation system whereby there is no solution because the linear function graph never intersects the quadratic function graph. So for this particular question, we are looking at the two solutions scenario where we know we're going to have one answer here and another one there. And those answers, remember, are ordered pairs, x1, y1, and the other one, we can call this x2, y2. That's what the question is saying. There's going to be two solutions. So we have to solve this system. And then once we solve the system, we need to answer this part, which is what is y1 plus y2? That's what this question is saying. Please keep in mind, as we've always said, once you understand the concept on the SAT of every question, because every question has a concept, you're 90% done with that problem. Now that we know all we need to do is solve this system, let's talk about the methods that we could use. We could either solve this algebraically, which is really, really tedious. However, really, really important that we do that. So we can review a lot more concepts that we need to be aware of. Second method we are going to use to solve for this is using decimals, which is the easier thing to do and the method that I actually expect you to use when you take this test. So to solve this system of equations using the algebraic method, we'll specifically use the elimination method. To do that, we're going to isolate y in this top equation, and once we have y by itself, we'll replace that y value up here. So let's start off by getting y by itself in the linear equation. I'm going to subtract x from both sides as shown. And if I do it on the left side, subtract x and then subtract 1, we have to also subtract the x and subtract the 1 on the right side as well. So notice how the x and the 1's cancel on this left. And now the equation, the linear equation, is y equals negative x minus 1. Notice how the top equation also has a y value, the quadratic equation. That's to say that we can take this negative x minus 1 because that represents y, and we can plug it back into this top quadratic equation. Let's do that. So we're going to have negative x minus 1 equals x squared plus 2x plus 1. And then to solve a quadratic equation, we must set it equal to 0. Remember, you always want the x squared to be a positive number, so we'll leave that alone. On that side, it's better to move these guys to the right side. So I'm going to add the x, I'm going to add the 1. On the left side, if I do that on the left, I have to do that same thing on the right side as well. So I'm going to add the x, I'm going to add the 1. So notice how these cancel. That's the goal. If you're solving a quadratic, you have to set it equal to 0. So x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0. You can solve for this equation using any number of ways, but let's use the x games, also known as the x method. Most teachers are teaching this. I'm going to stick to it. You have product, which is the a value times the c value, and you have sum, which is the b value. So for this quadratic equation, remember the a value is the number attached to x squared, so that's a 1. The b value is the number attached to x, and the c value is a constant. So for us, it'll be 1 times 2, that's the a times c, which is a 2. And then the b value is 3, which is the sum. Then the question becomes, we ask ourselves, which two numbers do we multiply together? That's why we say product, to get a 2. And then when we add those same numbers together, we get a 3. The only way that that works is if you have 1 times 2. Real quickly, 1 times 2 is indeed 2. And then 1 plus 2 is 3. So we found a pair that works. And remember, when you're factoring, when you find that pair, you're pretty much done with the question. So this is going to be x plus 1 and x plus 2. Those are the two numbers that we found right here. Okay, so now we need to solve for x in each of these. Remember, when you're solving for x, you set each of your factors equal to 0, and you just solve. Just, use inverse operations. Subtract 1 from both sides, subtract 2 from both sides, and then you end up having x equals -1 for your first solution, and x equals -2 for your second solution. Please note that we are not done with this question. Remember, we were told that this system of equations has two solutions that look like this: x1, y1, and x2, y2. Right now, all we've found is the x values. So let's actually set this up in terms of parentheses. We found the first x value to be -1, but we don't know the y value corresponding to it. And the other solution has an x value of -2, but we don't know the second y value associated with it. If memory serves, you will remember that if you know the x value of a point, to find the corresponding y value, all you do is take the known x value and plug it back into the equation. So this one will be y equals -1 minus 1. So which is y equals 1 minus 1, y equals what? 0. So the missing y1 value is 0. So we have -1 comma 0. Let's repeat that process for the other x value that we do know. We would take the known x value, which is a -2, plug it into this x right here. It becomes y equals -2 minus 1. And that's going to be y equals 2 minus 1. So y equals what? 1. And now the ordered pair for this is -2 comma 1. Remember, this question wanted us to determine what y1 plus y2 is. This is y1, this is y2. So this is simply 0 plus 1, which means the answer to this is simply 1. That makes D the correct answer to this question. But again, remember, I say that there are many ways to do these problems. This is the algebraic method. It's tedious, but I really wanted us to go over this so you remember several things. Let's talk about those things. I wanted you to remember that there are three scenarios when you have a system of a linear and a quadratic equation. You could have two solutions where the graphs cross two places. You could have one solution where the graphs intersect or cross at one place, and you could have no solution where the graphs never intersect. That's one thing. Second thing I wanted you all to remember is that you can solve a system of equations using the substitution method. So you have to isolate a variable, and then once you have it isolated, you plug it back into the other equation. And then a third thing I wanted you to remember is when you're factoring quadratic equations to solve, you have to set them equal to 0. And then you use this x method to find the pairs of numbers that works. And then once you've done that, you can finish the problem by finding the corresponding y values. Now, let's look at the other method we could use to solve this question. That's using Desmos. Let's go to Desmos. Great, so welcome to Desmos. Same exact question. Notice how much more efficient this method is. You would simply take the first equation that you were given, y equals x squared plus 2x, and type it into Desmos like that. And it's going to graph this quadratic equation in red right here. Then you're going to take the second equation that you were given, but remember, you have to isolate y. That's how Desmos understands these equations. So then you're going to graph that, and you have your linear equation. Notice immediately, let me hide the equations because you see how to enter them. Here is the first solution, which is -2, 1. Guess what? That's one of the solutions that we found right here, -2, 1. Look at the other solution, which is -1, 0. And here it is, -1, 0. So much quicker if you use Desmos. But remember, the question was asking you to find y1 plus y2. Remember, just add those y values. 0 plus 1 is 1. And again, you get the same answer as D right there. Hope this helps.